greater than all my sin. Not a catchy or funny one. It's just, I actually was going to do fruit of the Spirit. I was going to spend this week and next week on the fruit of the Spirit. So we are going to do that. But when I sat down yesterday to finalize things, God just like, no, this is it. And I will tell you, it's down in here on the paper. The biblical examples. I actually put this lesson together because I saw this on social media. This grace. It said, this is what grace looks like, and then it had these. And then I kind of went off that. And I was going to change things because I love the idea, and then I'm like, nope, examples are perfect. And I told my husband, I said, this feels wrong. He's like, it's not wrong. There's nothing new under the sun, so, but it definitely is what God wanted me to go over today, is grace that is greater than all my sin. Webster's 1828 dictionary, which, if you don't have what, just put Webster's 1828 in your phone and Google, and it'll bring up, and it'll say search, and that's what I press on search and put it in. Grace, pardon me, is defined as favor, goodwill, kindness, unmerited love in favor of God, the application of Christ's righteousness to the sinner. And what a beautiful picture this paints of God's love towards us. That favor, goodwill, kindness, unmerited love in favor of God. I just think that's so beautiful. And we often talk about and hear about God's mercy and love towards us. And we understand that mercy can be defined as not getting what we deserve. God is merciful towards us as saved Christians, as his children, because he is not giving us what we deserve, which is an eternity in hell. And so that is what we call mercy. And actually him just not striking me down dead because I sin all the time is God's mercy. And there's just so many areas of our life where it's mercy. But today we're not going to talk about mercy. We're going to talk about grace. And I just think it's just beautiful. Another definition for grace is getting what I do not deserve. Okay, it's opposite of mercy. Mercy is not getting what I do deserve. Grace is getting what I do not deserve. Okay, that's God's blessings, his favor towards us as his children, even though we don't deserve it, And when I stopped and really thought about this, just how undeserving I am of not only salvation and a home in heaven and all that's God's promised me, but I'm so undeserving of all the good things and favor and blessings he shows me in this life. I mean, look, I've got a wonderful church family. I've got a beautiful home. I have a wonderful family, little guy that comes over and goes, I want to go to my mom's house, and God's favor and blessings. And too often I'm guilty of not seeing it as grace, as God's favor and blessings in my life, It's just, and it just really made me stop and think. So we're going to look at some examples in the Bible today that are pictures of God's grace. And again, there's my disclosure. But the first one is about Peter. So let's go to John 18. John chapter 18. John chapter 18, verses 16 and 17. And then we'll jump down to verse 25 and 27 of chapter 18. So John 18:16 says, But Peter stood at the door without, then went out that other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. This is when Jesus appears before Annas. Verse 17, Then saith the damsel that kept the door unto Peter, Art not thou also one of this man's disciples? And he saith, I am not. Oh, it just breaks my heart breaks my heart, but yet I do the same thing, you know. And then jump down to verse 25 to 27, and that says, of that same chapter, chapter 18, and Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. They said therefore unto him, art not thou also one of his disciples? There it is again. And he denied it and said, I am not. Verse 26, one of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off, saith, did not I see thee in the garden with him? And this is the heartbreaker to me. 27, Peter then denied again, and immediately the cock crew. And it's not in this passage, but in one of the parallel passages where it talks about, and Jesus looked at him.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that one
it just pierces me, because I just picture that when Peter said that, Peter then denied again, and immediately the cock crew, and then his eyes meet Jesus. I wish I would have thought to look it up, but I didn't. But it is in one of the parallel passages about this story. And just knowing that Peter denied him 3 times, you know, and we're like, how could Peter do that? But actually, we do that. We may not come right out and say it, but we do it by our life. When we don't tell others about Christ and we don't share our faith and what the Lord Jesus has done for him, it's the same as denying him. It really is. Makes me think of that song, hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. That's what Christianity is about. And when rubber met road, Peter was more concerned about Peter, you know, and we really can't, you know, point the finger too much, because we are the same way. We have to on purpose live not that way, because our flesh and Satan are trying to get us to live that way, where we care more about us than we care about Christ. So Peter, here we see Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Here's the grace, though. So, you know, the title is Grace That Is Greater Than All My Sin. Here we see Peter sinned. Why? Because he denied Christ 3 times. That was a sin. That was a just heartbreaking sin. And yet we're going to see God's grace in this. Let's go to John chapter 21, verse 12. Would anyone like to read that?
I will.
Okay, go ahead, Bev.
Jesus saith unto them, come and dine. And none of the disciples durst ask him, who art thou? Knowing that it was the Lord.
So here we have Jesus' appearance, bless you, by the sea. And if you go back to the first part of chapter 21, it says, after these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples. And then even after all, this is after Christ had rose from the grave. Okay, he had died on the cross, rose from the grave, and now he has shown himself. Okay, and he's shown himself to the disciples. And so here we have Peter. I wonder what was going through Peter's mind, you know. And I stop and think about my sin and wonder sometimes just how God could love me with the sinner that I am. And so I imagine, you know, Peter's a human being too, and he did love the Lord. He's human, flesh, messed up, didn't do what was right. I mean, I can identify, unfortunately, with all of that. Yet Jesus invited him to have a meal with him. You know, so yes, the sin was there, but guess what? God's grace was greater than all Peter's sin. And I just think that is so amazing, because he showed Peter love and favor and kindness that Peter didn't deserve. Peter had just, so to speak, thrown him under the bus 3 times, and it broke the Lord. I know it broke the Lord's heart, because it gives in that passage how he looked at him, and I know that had to have hurt, but it had to have hurt Peter, because I know when I sin, I know that it hurts me, knowing that I've hurt Christ. You know what? And if we really love Jesus Christ like we say we do, then when we do things that hurt him, it will bother us.
Yes.
If there's no bother, if there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? Remorse for our sin, how can there be salvation there? How can we really appreciate and love God if we're not even sorry for when we hurt him? I always wanted my kids to be sorry for their disobedience. We had a heart-to-heart talk, okay, this is what you did. Mom told you to do this, but you did this. And that hurts my heart, because you should love me enough and respect me enough to obey me. Well, goodness, on a much larger scale, this is how it should be with the Lord, is we should love and respect him so much. So here we see a perfect example of grace that is greater than all Peter's sin. And the next one is also in John. And let's go to John 20, the next example, John chapter 20, verses 24 to 26. Somebody like to read that? Go ahead, Donna.
But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. And the other disciples therefore said unto him, We have seen the Lord. But he said unto them, Except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. Where am I? 26?
26, yeah.
And after 8 days, again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, Peace be unto you.
Thank you, John. So here we see, this is after the resurrection, and we have Thomas doubting. And that's what we've nicknamed him over, Doubting Thomas, And you may have been called are you a doubting Thomas, where you don't believe, something that God has said? I mean, this was foretold that the resurrection was going to happen. And Jesus told them, talked to them about it even, before it happened, and it just, what were you going to say, Jen?
I was going to say, I think of that song, Why Worry When You Can Pray? Don't be a doubting Thomas.
Yep, yep, and that's where the nickname came from. But it's not really hard for me to see me doing the same thing, You have to wonder, and when she read this, verse 25, okay, but verse 24, but Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. Okay, so the other disciples in verse 25, therefore said unto him, We have seen the Lord. So they're saying, look, we've already seen him. It's true. He has risen from the grave. He is here. And Thomas, whose heart was probably broken, after knowing that the Lord had died and what he had suffered and all that, he's just, I'm not going to believe it. I don't know what had happened that made him so doubting, but I know things have happened in my life where you're not going to scam me with that. I'll believe it when I see it, kind of thing, And I've done that, but I love how the other disciples say, we've seen him, we have seen him. But Thomas, even after probably his best friends, wouldn't you think the disciples were all probably best friends? I know there are probably, amongst 12 people, there's going to be some personality things, but I would say you guys are some of my best friends, so it's probably the same thing. And some personalities mesh a little bit better, but they were still really, really good friends. And here he has his really, really good friends telling him, we've seen him. And what did he say again? But he said unto them, except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. He was pretty detailed about what would make him believe, And, I was thinking, if you guys had told me something, it just makes me think that something happened that made him so doubting, that when the others said this, maybe his grief was just so great, is what I keep going back to, and thinking that his heart is so broken, and he's just like, I gotta see it for myself. I can't believe you. I can't put my heart out there like that again to get crushed,
I wonder was he there at the crucifixion? And Jesus he raised Lazarus and so forth, but that was coming from Jesus, who was alive, and then he watched his Savior be beaten and hung up there and seen him physically die. And it's like having the rug pulled out from under him.
Yeah.
And
It's good,
like,
Deb.
he had the power, but I watched him die. That stopped that power. So perhaps just the immense
Heartache and grief.
heartache and grief.
And that's kind of what I've just kept going back to. But still, the Lord had told them this was coming. So it's almost like he didn't believe Jesus. And so wonder how the Lord felt, like hearing him say that. And of course, the Lord understands our humanity and all this. And that Thomas is human, and he was hurting, and he was doubting. But
that makes me kind of think of how people doubt the Lord because of, they say, how can the Lord let something like this happen? But the Bible says it's going to happen.
yeah, it's true. That's true. And so I wonder, what the Lord felt when he heard Thomas say that. Here he has the other disciples, his friends, saying, we saw him. What do you think, they're lying? And the Lord saying, I told you this was coming, and I told you what was going to happen after, that I would rebuild this temple within 3 days. Put all the pieces together here, Thomas. Why are you having a hard time believing this? But that's his humanity. That's our humanity. And but I do love the grace that God showed him in verse 27. Hannah, would you like to read verse 27 of chapter 20, John 20?
Then saith he to Thomas, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing.
There it is. Be not faithless. Doubting Thomas's faith was pretty wimpy, So I don't know, maybe his faith muscles hadn't been built up real well, like some of the others. Of course, the others had the advantage of they'd already seen him, so we don't know, how they would have responded to that. But we do see here that Thomas, his faith was weak here, and but it's great because I really see God's, Jesus extending him grace here. He's like, okay, I get it. I get your humanity. And even though you were told this, and even though I've shown you that I can do great things, so this is not too hard for me, still, all right, Thomas, go ahead. And he tells him, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands. Reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. And do you think Thomas really had to do that stuff at that point? No. No. Jesus is standing in front of him talking, and he's like, it's true. And I'll tell you what, that built his faith muscle. So next time around, I'm thinking that when faced with, having to exercise his faith, that he had more faith because his faith muscle was stronger because of this. I mean, if Jesus says it's going to happen, it's going to happen, But how many times do I disappoint the Lord because my faith is small? Because I don't believe everything that his word says. God's word is absolutely full of promises and tells us what to do in this situation or that situation. He says, if we do this, then this happens. That's the problem most of the time, is that first part. We don't do our part. And then we're like, why didn't God do his part? Why didn't he do this? Well, because you didn't do your part. But what God says he will do, he will do. He is faithful. God has promised us a home in heaven when we die. He is faithful, and he is going to do that. He's promised us that we are going to be comforted in our pain and in our hurt and in our sorrow. He is faithful. He has promised if we tithe and give like we're supposed to, like he's commanded us, he is faithful. He's going to take care of us. Just promise after promise. But so many times I must disappoint him, and he must be like, Julie, be not faithless, but believing, just like with Thomas. But his answer was very gracious. So we see Thomas's sin in having small faith when he'd already seen a lot of things happen. He had seen great miracles. And so for him not to believe what Jesus had said, it is a sin. And it is for us too. But the Lord showed him grace and told him, okay, if this is what you need to do, then go ahead. Reach hither thy finger, behold my hands, reach hither thy hand and thrust it into my side. And then the admonition, but it's an understanding one. And that's what grace is, grace again is unmerited love and favor of God. So even though Thomas had failed in a way, the Lord's like, okay, I understand your humanity. I wish this wasn't the way it was, but here we are, And so it's the same with us. So I love that picture of grace. And then the next example is found in John chapter 4, verses 1 through 9. And who would like to read verses 1 through 9?
I will, if you want to. When therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself baptized not, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again unto Galilee. And he must needs go through Samaria. Then cometh he to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. There cometh a woman of Samaria, and to draw water. Jesus said unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans.
Thank you. And then jump down to verses 17 and 18, please.
The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said unto her, Thou hast well said, I have no husband. For thou hast had 5 husbands, and he who thou now hast is not thy husband. is that saidest, in that sayest that thou truly.
Thank you, Donna.
Stand
Yeah.
out.
Well, that's the
We got what you
saddest
were
is a
saying.
hard word, yeah. So here we have the woman at the 5 well. She'd had 5 husbands. Well, first of all, the Jews did not talk to whatever, the Samaritans. I believe the Samaritans were referred to as half-breeds, okay? And just dogs. I mean, they just were looked down upon by the Jews, but not by Jesus.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
that wasn't something Jesus said to do. He would never want us to act that way, and we should always remember that as we deal with others, because here he is, and he's talking to her, and then, you know, she'd had 5 husbands, and she was living with somebody else, and so she was, you know, fornicating, adultery. I mean, everything. You know, the fornication here, just living with somebody, and then she'd already had, you know, 5 other men. So this is not a lady that was doing the right things. She was sinning. But here we see again grace that is greater than all my sin. She could have had 20 husbands, and then been living with this guy, and it wouldn't have changed what Jesus did and how he handled her. And I love that, because his grace is greater than all of our sin, and it was greater than her sin. And then we see the grace in John chapter 4, verse 10. Jesus answered and said unto her, I mean, he already knew all this stuff about her. He could have chosen not to talk to her, but that's not who Jesus is. He said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldest asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. That was an invitation to her. Mm-hmm. Even though Jesus knew all that stuff, and let alone that she was from Samaria, Jesus still handled her with such grace and love, and offered her what he offers everybody. There's a saying that says the ground is level at the cross. And I've thought of that so many times, because it doesn't matter if it's the person that's living on the streets and has nothing, and they're dirty and filthy and they've done terrible things, or if it's the President of the United States or a king sitting somewhere on his throne. It doesn't matter. The ground is level at the cross. And that's what we see here. The ground is level at the cross. And even though she was a sinner, as we all are, and still sinning, Jesus offered her the living water. Jesus showed her grace. And that's a very wonderful example to us of how we are to treat others. We should never, ever discriminate against who we share the gospel with, ever. Right. Everybody deserves the gospel. The ground is level at the cross, and if I can be saved, anybody can be saved. So this lady here, the woman at the well, she saw grace from Jesus that was greater than all her sin. And then Luke chapter 19, let's go there for another example. Luke 19, 1 through 4. Jen, you want to read this one?
Yeah, I can read it. I get the names. Some of these names are.
Oh, that's okay. Just you
Muddle
just
through
say them and act like you know. Yeah.
Okay. And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. And he ran before and climbed up into the sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass by that way.
Thank you, Jen. So here we see Zacchaeus. I wonder how little Zacchaeus was.
I just picture a little Hannah when she was little. I'm sorry.
we sing that song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Well, how wee was he, I wonder? But anyway, he was a tax collector. Oh. That was not a position that people loved him for.
Right.
So he was not a loved member of society. They're already hurting, and many times these dealers, these office holders, of tax collectors. They were crooked, and they were taking their money. And so he was not loved. He was hated by everyone. And here we have, he sought, verse 3, he sought to see Jesus, who he was. Okay? So here we have someone that was hated, and, we don't see hate from Jesus. We see grace. And he could not for the press because he was little. And it's just, Jesus knows what's going on all around him. Makes me think of the woman who reached out with the issue of blood. He knows what's going on around him. So he knows this little guy, however little he was, Zacchaeus, was trying to see him, and he couldn't because of the press. And he ran before and climbed up in that sycamore tree. So Jesus knew right what was going on. And he could have kept passing by. Like, he's a hated member of society. I am not going to have anything to do with that. Is not going to help my cause here. That is not who Jesus is. And instead, we see him extend grace. And he looks up and he tells them in verse 5? Yeah. And when Jesus came to the place, to the tree, he just stopped. I added that. And saw him and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. He didn't go up and whisper it to him. He didn't go. He said it in front of everybody. Everybody who disliked Zacchaeus, who was up in the tree, and now they're all looking up in the tree and they're like, that guy, are you sure you mean that guy? He's the tax collector. He's not a great guy. None of that mattered to Jesus. He knew right what was going on, and he extended grace. And even though nobody else wanted to be around him, have nothing to do with him, Jesus actually said, I'm going to your house today.
It just made me think of, me and another person was out soul winning yesterday, and first door I knocked on, and a gentleman answered, and you could just feel the hate and the just anger, and I just started talking to him a little bit, and I handed him the tract. And I thought, Lord, that used to be me. I used to be an angry, miserable person. And people discriminate, I don't want to give that tract to that person. Yes, give that tract to that person, because you are the same person. Doesn't matter if you're angry or not an angry person. You're something.
That's right. And something I've tried to remember too is we don't know what they're going through.
We don't.
Right.
They may have just lost a spouse. They may have just got a repo on their house. We just don't know what's making them angry. And maybe they're just an angry person, and they need people, Jesus. That's right. So here we have the Lord changed Zacchaeus. And what a beautiful picture of grace when the Lord said to somebody that nobody else liked or wanted anything to do, come on, he said this in front of everybody, come on down, Zacchaeus. You come down, climb down the tree. I'm going to your house. He didn't say he was going to anyone else's house. The people that were following him and very faithful and probably do you need anything? I'm sure there were those. But we do see that he said to Zacchaeus, it's your house I'm going to. Come on down. So what a beautiful picture of grace. The next one is John 8, chapter 8, verses 1 through 9. And who would like to read that one?
I can.
Go ahead, Tiff, when you get there.
Jesus went into the Mount of Olives. And early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and he taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. What sayest thou? This they said, tempting him, that they might have,
Accuse him.
that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground, as though he had heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst.
This is such a beautiful picture of grace. The adulterous woman was caught in the act, and she was dragged before the crowd. I mean, she was caught in the act. There's no way that she could fight it. And the law was to stone her, to kill her. But here we see God's grace in verses 10 and 11. I'll read that. When Jesus had lifted up himself, because remember, he was writing on the ground. We don't know what he was writing. Everybody has different theories. Some think that he was writing all their sins on the ground. Some thought he was writing the law of Moses. I mean, just different things. The Lord doesn't tell us what. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And here we have grace with a big capital G. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. I mean, if that doesn't picture grace, I don't know what does. She was caught in the act. She knew she would sin. She knew she deserved this. And yet, here's Jesus, sinless, all power in the world, and he chose to defend her to those others that wanted to stone her, even though she had done wrong. He defended her and told her to go free and sin no more. Beautiful, beautiful picture of grace. For that lady, grace that is greater than all my sin.
Mm-hmm.
The last one is Matthew chapter 26. Verse 47 to 56. Who would like to read that one? We're almost done here.
47 and 56.
Yes, please.
Okay. And while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, Whosoever I shall kiss, that same is he. Hold him fast. And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant for the high priest and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that this it must be? In the same hour said Jesus to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and ye laid no hold on me. But all this was done, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. And they that laid hold.
That's good right there, Beth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. No, that's okay. That is that last line there, then all the disciples forsook him and fled. I want us to have a little background on how that happened. But can you imagine, after everything the Lord Jesus is going through, and it would be like us, we're in some kind of situation, and I needed you, and you forsook me and fled. And even deeper, imagine if your spouse or your mom or your dad, someone close to you like that, or your children, they just, in your moment of need, they just forsook you and fled, nowhere to be found. And that is just so heartbreaking, and it must have broke the Lord's heart. Still, he understands our humanity. And in Matthew 28, let me see, I'm not going to be able to read all those anyway. Oh, it's verse 10. But then said Jesus unto them, Be not afraid. Go tell my brethren that they see me into Galilee, and there she'll see me. That's not the one I'm looking for. Anyway, it's okay. Anyway, so the point is that the disciples, and it was a sin. It was a sin for them to forsake the Lord like that. I mean, they shouldn't have. Their humanity caused them to do it, but, you know, it was wrong and it hurt him. But still, he called them brothers. Yeah, and I just think about how many times we hurt the Lord, and he never takes our position away. You know, I hurt him every day, multiple times a day. I try not to, but I just mess up. And yet, I'm always on my way to heaven still. Once saved, always saved. He's still right there for me anytime I want to talk to him. God's not the one that pulls back. We are, you know. And yet, every time I come to my senses and go back to him, he's right there with welcoming arms. His grace is greater than all my sin. It was greater than the disciples' sin. It was greater than the adulterous woman's sin. It was greater than Zacchaeus' sin, the woman at the well's sin, Thomas's sin, and Peter's sin. The grace that God extends is always, always greater than all of our sin. Doesn't matter what you've done or even what you will do. His grace is greater than all of our sin. And it makes, you know, that song, Grace, Grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all our sin. I was looking for that song this morning. You know, I have a book that has backgrounds to it, tells you, you know, about who wrote the song and all that, but it wasn't in there, thankfully. I think this says, let's live our life thankful for his grace. Let's live our life thankful for his grace. Because if we keep that in our mind, the Lord's grace, then it'll change the way we live. It'll make us read our Bible more. It'll make us have a better, sweeter relationship with him if we understand that we are receiving God's favor, unmerited love and favor from the God of the universe, the creator of all. Thank you to our online friends.